All right, today we're tackling a question that's literally thousands of years old. But you know where it popped up just the other day? Online. So, yeah, let's get right into it.
So it all kicked off with a post on a Reddit forum, of all places, a theology forum to be exact. And a user asked this question that honestly cuts right to the heart of Christianity. It just goes to show, even in our super digital world, we're still grappling with these huge foundational questions. And here's the question itself. What evidence proves Jesus' divinity purely from the Gospels, without relying on external texts? Simple enough, right? It sounds direct, super specific, lays out the rules of the game. But the answer? That's where it gets complicated. Really complicated.
Okay, so right up front, I gotta be clear. This explainer isn't here to give you a simple yes or no. That's not the goal. Instead, we're going to dig into why this question is so tricky to answer in the first place. We're gonna look at the very building blocks of the whole debate.
And to do that, we've got to do what any good investigator would. We need to break the question down, take it apart piece by piece, and really look at the keywords that shape this entire conversation. So that brings us to our first section, unpacking the language. We're going to zero in on 3 key terms from that original question: the Gospels, divinity, and, that really loaded word proof.
Okay, first up, the Gospels. So for anyone who might not be familiar, we're talking about the 4 main stories of Jesus' life in the New Testament. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But here's the real kicker. What kind of documents are they really? And that's where things start to get interesting. So you have to ask, are these things historical records, like a direct factual play-by-play of what happened? Or are they something else, maybe more like theological narratives, stories written to convince you of a specific belief about what it all meant? And while most scholars today lean heavily toward the second one, they've got history in them, for sure, but their main job is theological. They're trying to send a message. And this, right here, is the central challenge. It's like you're not reading a neutral police report, you're reading the prosecution's closing argument.
All right, next up is divinity. Pretty straightforward, right? It just means the state of being a god. So in this context, it's the big claim that Jesus wasn't just some great teacher or a prophet, but that he was actually divine.
And that brings us to the final word, proof. Now, this is where our modern world really bumps up against the ancient one. See, for us, proof means something scientific or legal. It's got to be verifiable, objective, something you can really pin down. But can you really apply that same standard to a collection of 2,000-year-old faith-based stories? That's the question. Okay, so we've got our terms defined. With all that in mind, let's actually look at how people who argue for Jesus' divinity go about trying to find that proof inside the Gospels. What does that search even look like? Well, usually the search boils down to about 5 key areas. You've got Jesus' own direct claims, when he says things like, "I and the Father are one." Then there are all the miracles and supernatural stuff. People also point to ancient prophecies and how he supposedly fulfilled them. There's the testimony of his followers. And of course, the big one, the absolute cornerstone of the whole thing, the resurrection. For proponents, all of this together builds a pretty powerful case. But, and this is a big but, like we've already talked about, these texts aren't just simple historical records. And that's exactly where this hunt for concrete, hard proof runs into a massive wall. And this brings us right to the heart of this whole explainer. The kind of evidence you find in the Gospels, it's not the kind that just sits there and speaks for itself. No, it demands something from you, the reader. So check this out. This book on the screen is an Arabic version of a really famous work called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. I mean, the title says it all, right? It's basically arguing that the evidence is so powerful, it forces you to make a choice, kind of like a juror sitting in a courtroom. But here's the thing. When you actually go back and look at the Gospels themselves, they just don't work that way. You can't just flip to a chapter called Exhibit A, Definitive Proof of Divinity. It's not there. There's this gap between the stories they tell and the verdict some people say they demand. And this space, this quiet spot between the story and our modern need for proof, it isn't actually empty. It has to be filled with something, but it's not filled with more words from the text. It's filled by us, the reader. And that's the absolute key takeaway here. That space, it's filled by interpretation. Whether your interpretation is driven by faith, or maybe it's shaped by skepticism, or you're coming at it from a historical angle, it doesn't matter. The reader is the one who has to bridge that gap. The text gives you the building materials, but you're the one who has to build the bridge to a conclusion. All right, so this brings us to our final section, our wrap-up. After taking apart the language and looking at this whole search for proof, what have we actually learned about the question itself? Well, I think we've learned that the Gospels were definitely written with a purpose, but that purpose wasn't to pass a 21st century evidence test. They're ancient texts meant to proclaim a message, not modern texts designed to provide scientific proof. So at the end of the day, the journey for anyone reading these texts, whether you're a believer, a skeptic, a historian, whatever, it kind of follows the same steps. First, you encounter the story. Then you analyze the claims it's making. After that, you have to interpret what it all means. And only then, at the very end, do you get to reach your own personal conclusion, your verdict. You know, ultimately, that original Reddit question, it's not really just about one person from history. It cracks open a much bigger conversation, right? It's about how we read any ancient text, how we think about truth, and how we find meaning in stories that are so deeply woven into both faith and history. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. It's not so much about if there's evidence, but more about what we expect that evidence to do for us. When a text is 2,000 years old and it's so completely steeped in faith, what does the word proof even mean anymore?